Today we welcome Paul Kapp, currently the CRO at MongoDB. We follow his illustrious career through organizations such as PTC, BMC, AppDynamics, and now MongoDB. And we explore the CRO toolkit. We talk about the various stages of leadership. We talk about some of the blind spots that people earlier in their career perhaps overlook, and we talk about how to lead with empathy. This is his playbook. Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Kutitz and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Welcome back to the show, everyone.
And it's with great pleasure that we introduce Paul Kapp. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours. So again, long time coming. Appreciate you taking time to come and see us today.
No worries.
By way of an introduction, you are currently or newly appointed 6 months ago CRO at MongoDB.
That's correct.
And in today's episode, we really want to talk about the CRO toolkit.
Yeah.
There are a lot of misconceptions about what a CRO is and what a CRO isn't. But also there's a lot of skills and there's some different lenses that the role entails, and we really want to kind of tackle some of that and talk about that. So I suppose that the first question is, tell us a little bit about what is a CRO?
It's a great question. I don't think there's one answer for that. I think it's a very broad answer in that, you're the chief revenue officer of a company, but being a chief revenue officer of a $5 million company is very different from being a chief revenue officer at a $100 million company. And then when you become a $1 billion company, you're just in a different league altogether. And so I think over time, the role will morph and mature. There's not one textbook answer for that, right? So I think it depends on what's the space that you're looking for, right? Because I think they're vastly different roles.
And I think that's probably a big part of what we want to talk about is there are differences. And I suppose we asked the question intentionally broad because I think there is a misconception that, all CRO roles are equal, but it's not it's about understanding that as you start to evolve and to become a CRO at $1 billion company, there's so much more that you need to understand. So we really want to start to unpick that. But perhaps just take us to maybe some of the foundations, because interestingly, some of the foundations as you start to scale your career are quite similar. So take us through the first part of that journey and then how it evolves as you start to kind of scale.
Meaning what? As a CRO, or meaning in your journey from a career standpoint?
In your journey as getting to CRO.
Yeah, I think a lot of people make the mistake of chasing a title, and they maybe don't understand what it involves. And I don't mean even just CRO. You can be a sales rep to a first-line leader, and frankly, most sales reps, when they go from or sales rep to first-line leader, they don't actually know what the job entails. Mm-hmm. And then every step of the way that you go, if you're a CRO of a $10 million company, you're going to have 2 first-line managers. If you're a CRO of a $1 billion company, you're going to have 50 first-line managers, right? And a bunch of other layers in between. So the job becomes way more complex, right? Just from a people standpoint. For me personally, I grew up at a company called PTC, which had I was very fortunate. This was in the late 90s. And I was at a company that worked as a meritocracy. And if you performed well and you did your job well, and you were really willing to put it in the time to developing yourself, your career opportunities were limitless. And so I was fortunate in that. I was fortunate also that the company did a ton of development, right, in its people. And so what that did for me at an early stage in my career, I got into the software industry kind of by accident. And what I soon realized was, wow, what were the opportunities in this market were just, immeasurable, right? And so from that early onset of my software career, I started to map out a career in my head. right? I was misguided at the time because I think what happens when you're a young leader, you want to go from young leader to CRO as fast as humanly possible. And the mistake I think that people make is you really have to learn your craft so that when you actually get the opportunity to become a CRO or a senior executive, you're in a position to win, right? Because you've put the time into developing yourself, you've got time in the chair, and so on and so forth.
Can we start at the bottom then and start thinking about and breaking down each of those, from an IC to a first line? What are some of the important things that you need to master in each of those stages, and when is the right time to move from an IC to a first line, and then each of the different stages then on after?
Yeah, that's a good question. People are always not always, often in a rush to get to the next thing. I have found that people who put the time in the chair of understanding how to sell a particular product in a specific market, really understanding your craft, right? And then doing it well and showing that you can do it over and over and being consistent about it. Once you've learned that craft and then you get moved up to a first line sales leader, you can then teach that. But if you haven't mastered that part of the job, you're going to be at a disadvantage when you're trying to teach it, right? And so that really goes all the way up the chain of command, is really mastering the job that I'm in today so that when I get moved up, I understand how to develop the people that are in those roles, whether that's an IC role, whether it's a first line leader role, second line leader role, and so on and so forth.
So as you start going up from first line to second line, you're obviously transitioning from being on the pitch to being able to coach others and then coaching others to coach others.
Yes.
As we start going higher up, how does that focus start to adapt as you start scaling higher up through an organization?
It comes down to scalability, right? And so I'm in a role today, I'm a CRO of a $2 billion company. I can't get my hands on everything. It's impossible, right? I have to put the right people in the right chairs and make sure that those people are being developed so that they can go off and do whatever tasks they need to do. And what's hard, especially when you start as a leader, what I've seen, the de facto mistake that people make is they just want to put their hands on everything versus coaching people into doing things, right? That happens as a first line leader. You can kind of get away with it as a first line leader. You can be on the road, you can be doing deals with your teams, right? As a second line leader, even more so, because your go-to is to go and get your hands dirty. And in that second line role, you actually have to take a step back and start to coach and direct people into doing things so that they're also learning and developing themselves versus you doing it for them, right? And that's a big mistake I think that leaders make the further up the chain they go.
So just fast forwarding and kind of getting to much higher up.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you're in that first, second, even third, a lot of the focus is very much revenue, generating revenue. If we were to kind of talk about the CRO toolkit, especially if you're at a much larger organization, there's much more to that. And probably not a lot of people understand some of those additional facets of that role. So help us unpick some of that.
I think there are different kinds of CROs, right? I think some CROs probably are very hands-on. Even for a larger company, they want to have their hands dirty in deals, right? And I don't think that there's a right and a wrong. Probably a lot of CROs spend the vast majority of their time being in front of customers. The higher up you go, the harder it is to do that. The harder it is to be customer facing, right? Because you're just dealing with a much broader scope of job, and there's just a lot more things to deal with. And so my philosophy always was, if I'm a fourth or a fifth line leader, the more deals I need to get involved in, the worse I'm doing my job, right? I mean, when I was a second or third or fourth line leader, I didn't need my CRO, or if I was second line, I didn't need my third line leader doing that kind of work for me, right? So I think the best run organizations is not the people at the top negotiating those deals, because that's not really like value added, and people aren't really learning. If a senior sales leader is negotiating a contract, right? What are the 3 or 4 or 5 people underneath them doing? It's not, you're not developing your people that way.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. Obviously data is, and part of the playbook, right, is really getting to understand data, even as an IC, from, the beginning of the funnel, pipeline generation, all the way through to, book meetings, et cetera, et cetera. As you get further and further up, how complex does that data become? Or, how important is it to understand the data around you, and how fixated on that are you?
Yeah, I think as a first line leader and as a sales rep, the data is all about what's in it for me, right? If you're going to drive any kind of playbook or any kind of metrics or KPIs, as a sales rep, you want to understand, like, how is this benefiting me? And if I understand how it's benefiting me, I'm going to be willing to go along with it versus I'm driving KPIs that are being, sent up to senior management every Friday and nobody ever talks to me about it. I've seen that. We've all seen that in our careers. It's just a big waste of time, right? But I think for people that are reps and RDs, it's critical to like the day-to-day activities, right? That are good, the day-to-day activities, how it's driving your calendar, how it's driving your pipeline. At a senior level, you're looking at the data for sure in a similar fashion at a tactical level, but then at a strategic level, you have to ask yourself, what is the data telling me, right? I mean, even today I was on I have a go-to-market call every week, and we were looking at some high-level data that is going to be probably changing some of the strategies that we have moving forward, right? Whether that be headcount, positions, ratios, it just starts to get a lot more strategic at that point,
Yeah. What are some of those numbers, and what are, as a CRO, that are important to you as, in a $1 billion organization in comparison to maybe something that's, a lot smaller?
The two most important and critical numbers that are going to drive your business, and if you're not looking at these numbers, you're going to get caught with your pants down, is productive capacity and productivity. So productive capacity is, what is the horsepower that I have? How many feet do I have on the street, and how many quota dollars per head do I have out there, right? Do I have enough capacity to hit the company targets? And then if you break that down, your prod cap is based on productivity per rep. So those are the two levers. They're really the only two levers you can pull. Either I can add more firepower in prod cap, or I have to try and increase productivity. Productivity is a lot harder to increase than adding more firepower to the street, right? But if you take your eye off of either of those metrics, you're dead.
Where are some of the common mistakes that people make over those metrics? Does that come into play? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, my bet is that a first-time CRO at a small company wouldn't have the concept of productive capacity.
Right.
And that really is, if each rep I know is going to produce $1 million on an annual basis, and I got to hit a $50 million number, I'm going to have 60 to 65 million of quota that's on the street to be able to hit that number. That means I got to have 65 sales reps. So how am I tracking that number on a weekly basis? How seriously am I taking recruiting? How seriously am I taking attrition? Because those are two factors that feed into prod cap, right? So I can keep hiring people, but if the bucket is leaky at the bottom and I'm losing just as many people as I'm hiring, I'm actually losing productive capacity, because it takes a rep anywhere between 6 to 12 months to become productive. So if I'm losing 20% of my productive sales force and I'm replacing it with newer people, their productive capacity is 0 for anywhere between 6 to 12 months. So you have to maniacally focus on that. That's typically when you see companies in the news missing their numbers. I think it very often comes down to those two factors.
This episode is sponsored by Seller. Seller provides a white glove treatment to every complex deal with their bespoke system, whilst ensuring you get the most value from your CRM for everyday selling.
You talk a lot about playbooks, right? And I think there's a lot of obsession around playbook being sales execution. But playbook means so much more for you, especially as a CRO of a big organization like Mongo. So tell us a little bit about some of those additional facets of the playbook where you're able to then drive some of that productivity, because I think that really ties in.
Yeah. So I think the table stakes, when people refer to playbook, they refer to, do I have a sales process? Are my leaders really driving that sales process to benefit their people? Because if we know what works, why wouldn't we not do it over and over and over and over again, right? Do we have a qualification methodology? Do we have, pipeline generation is like a core tenet of our company? I think those are table stakes when people talk about playbooks. We've tried to expand our playbook. One of the things that we've done very successfully at Mongo is we came up with the concept of BDR to CRO, right? So the entry-level position to the highest level, position in the company. Now it's not meant to be taken literally because, there's only one CRO and, we've got, 1,000 sales reps, right? But really what it is a career path for people. And I think one of our core tenets and our core beliefs, and certainly my core belief, is I want to create an environment at MongoDB where people can come and earn and learn, get better, and have career opportunities that are not just going to impact them at Mongo, but could potentially impact them in their career after Mongo. None of us are going to stay at one company for the rest of our lives, right? And that's the dream that we've sold. And I think we've really lived up to our end of the bargain. And it's why we've had people stay at Mongo for really long tenures, right? And so that is really a big part of our playbook. And that career development, there's many things that we do, both from individual IC level enablement to what I think is probably the most comprehensive leader development program in the industry. We like to develop our leaders from within. And I'll just give you some metrics. So in my last, I think, quarter as running North America sales, which I did for 6 years at Mongo, I had 4 AVPs. All were developed from within. I had 14 RVPs. So AVP was third line, RVP second line. 13 of the 14 RVPs had been developed from within. And I think I had 54 RDs, first line leaders. 65% were developed from within. And so why do we do that? We do that because we want to develop people. We think it's like an amazing career opportunity for you, like I say, both within the company and then, for your career in general. But if I have an RD, a first-line leader who's getting promoted to second-line leader, think about how much more productivity I can get out of that person with their know-how of our sales process, our methodologies, our playbooks, and so on and so forth, right? So our productivity can be so much higher if we develop these people from within versus going to the outside potentially and hiring somebody. Not that that's a bad thing, but if I have to do that all the time, the ramp of those people is typically a year, right? So, that's kind of been a bit of our secret sauce. And really within that BDR to CRO framework, we've just developed so many things around it from, recruiting profiles.
You spend a lot of time on that, don't you?
Oh yeah, a lot of time.
How much time do you spend? How much training do your leaders do on knowing how to recruit?
So our leaders go through a 5-day comprehensive leader training. Either new leaders to the company or leaders that are getting promoted. Everybody goes through it. It doesn't matter what level you're at. And we do things in that week. We spend a day and a half on recruiting, a half a day just on profiles, a half a day on assessments that we do. We do personality assessments, to what's your pitch, to the interview process, to what's the recruiting process. We've documented the recruiting process. And through that, we've gone through different iterations of it over the years, and it's matured over time. We go through performance management. We go through we have everybody go through a course called Crucial Conversations, right? Because oftentimes people, I'm not even talking leaders, people avoid difficult conversations, right? And the angst and problems that causes are immeasurable, right? And so like those are the kinds of things that we teach our leadership. And after the initial class, knowing that they're going to forget 90% of it once they leave, we pull them back 6 months later and we go through another 3 days of similar topics, no slides, just discussions, roundtable discussions about recruiting and so on and so forth. And then what I had started also was for people that had gone through that class, I had scheduled a Friday call for whatever leaders wanted to attend the call. And I had 2 hours set aside where I would review profiles and assessments. And we would read them and discuss them as a group. And it's funny because you would think I've taught you the recruiting profile. When people came back for this second class, the number one topic they wanted to talk about was recruiting, because it's such an inexact science, as you guys well know, right?
Thanks to our sponsor, Pipeline Generation AI, the platform that researches your top accounts, creates insights and assets to help you engage more effectively. Elevate your conversations and transform your pipeline with Pipeline Generation AI today.
So it is really, really interesting. And you know, you talk about Playbook, but there are additional lenses that, as a CRO, especially at an organization that's constantly reiterating itself, what is the role of the CRO in helping to continue to keep an organization competitive and market relevant?
Yeah, I think, you know, leaders, and specifically senior leaders, can get caught up in the details and minutia and like over information, right? You can only imagine, you know, at a $2 billion company, the kind of the amount of information that is being thrown across my desk, right? And so I kind of go back to, at a $5 million company, it's a lot different than a $1 billion company. But for sure, one of the key aspects of being an amazing CRO is trying to figure out constantly what is next and how are you going to reinvent yourself, not just to keep up with the market, but to stay ahead of the market, right? And so, you know, one of the ways we've done that is we have a leader offsite every 90 days. And we spend, you know, a few days talking about coming with like problem statements and trying to figure out what's next and how we get ahead. And so, you know, it's interesting because when I joined Mongo back in 2017, we were an on-prem product that was open source, trying to convince people to pay for it, okay? Which was a very, very difficult job. I think at the time, the only successful open source company was Red Hat. And so we were really the second to sort of, you know, be successful in that open source model. And right after I joined, we had introduced our cloud product, which is Atlas, which is 80% of our business today, right? And at the time, it was a completely different motion. It's a completely different sell. And so you have to go and reinvent yourself. You have to reinvent the way you enable people. You have to reinvent the way that you sell. Like your sales process is going to change, or it's going to be altered, or there may be variations of a sales process. It's not just one sales process anymore. And then 2 years later, we get into a world where, you know, AWS had reinvented our industry in many ways in going to a consumption model. And so many of our sort of cohort companies that we grew up with over the last 10 years went to a consumption model. And that is a completely different sales process, right? And in fact, like we had, in our legacy sales process, we had 4 motions, right? We had a launch, which is basically someone's decided to go on a Mongo. There's not much that we need to do there, right? A migrate, they're going from Mongo to Mongo. So again, we're not going to overcomplicate a ham sandwich on these two things, right? Like we're not going to complicate it. But then you get into select or replace, which are now very competitive. So those are 4 distinct sales processes.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden we get to consumption. Those are still relevant, but then we have fast, because in many ways, if you're going to a consumption model, you're not negotiating like a large dollar amount contract. You're just going on a pure consumption model. So that completely changed things. And so we probably spent 1.5 to 2 years planning our move to consumption. And a lot of it has gone well, and a lot of it has been incredibly painful, but it's the right thing to do for our customers and for the company and so on and so forth, right?
How do you prepare yourself to be able to understand these facets? So I'm someone much earlier in my career, for example, and I've got aspirations to get to that point. How do I start to build that experience without having done that experience? Is there tell us yeah.
Meaning what? Meaning I join a company, I'm early in my career, and I aspire to be a certain role.
Yeah.
You're saying like a CRO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think is the question, how do you start to learn about those different departments if you're not actually directly connected to them in your earlier point in your career? Because it's not until you get to a CRO that, I suppose, or is that until you get to a CRO you don't have...
It's true, but like if you're a sales rep, you probably don't have a lot of exposure to, say, finance or sales ops, right? A little bit. But as you go up the chain, all of those functions become more important, because the further up you go, and again, we're depending on what size company you are, right? But if you've got a second and a third line function, you can't operate without insights from finance. You can't operate without insights from operations. You can't operate without insights of customer journey and your CSMs and planning and how we're going to go, build this business together. It really has become like a group activity. And yeah, you probably don't have that as a sales rep, but as you start to mature your career, you're gonna get more exposure at every level, I would say.
But obviously there's exposure, but there's a lot of people that see that as a bit of a burden. There's a lot of people that maybe are short-sighted in not welcoming that.
Yeah.
But should you be seeking that out? Should you be seeking exposure to that as you're progressing naturally, obviously in a natural way? Do you think that may be one of the lenses that's perhaps overlooked by those that then, start to plateau?
I don't know if it's overlooked. I just think that the higher you go, so I'm a regional director, I'm a frontline leader, I've got 5 or 6 reps, okay? That's my exposure, 5 or 6 reps. And what's my job really? I'm trying to develop my people, and I'm trying to hit a number for the quarter, okay? And all of a sudden now I'm a second line leader, and maybe as a second line leader, I've got 3 or 4 or 5 first line leaders. Well, I can't be super salesperson anymore, right? I now have to start driving the business through those 4 or 5 leaders, because if I go over the top of them, right, I'm going to clip their wings. And that's a very hard thing to do. It's the hardest thing I've seen when people go from first line to second line. But all of a sudden now, if I've got 5 regional directors and each one of those people has 5 or 6 reps, now I've got 30 people. Like now I have a business, like a good sized business. So I have to start managing that business differently than I did as a first line leader. I'll just give you as an example, right? So let's say as a frontline leader, you've got 5 reps. Well, the best rep's going to get the best account. But now all of a sudden I've got 5 leaders with 30 reps, right? I have to make some difficult decisions now, but I have to make the right decisions, right? Because now I'm running there's just way more options and there's way more things to think about. And now I go up to, I'm a third line leader, and all of a sudden I've gone from 20 or 30 people, I've got 50 people. I'm really running a business. And so it's not that finance and operations aren't important as a frontline person, but you get to like, all of a sudden you've got, 10 times as many people. I'm driving enough revenue. I could be driving a $50 million business all of a sudden, right? Very easily. So your responsibilities get more, and you also have to, because you've got that many more options, you now have to start thinking more strategically as well, right? Because you've got more options. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. So obviously time management, especially in a seat in an organization the size of MongoDB and the
Yeah.
seat that you're sat in, time management's obviously a ridiculously important point here, right? But how do you manage your time, and what are the core things in your week? If you were to break it down, day by day, week by week, however you go about doing it, or do you break it down month by month? What is your activities and what are the core fundamentals that you're doing on a daily basis as CRO?
Yeah. Well, I do my travel schedule and my QBR schedule a year in advance, right? So that's planned. I'm
Right.
not saying it can't move, but that's a year in advance. All the offsites that we do, the planning sessions, the QBRs, those are done well in advance. And then there's core things that I need during the week, whether they be one-on-ones, whether they be big deal reviews, or we call our major accounts pods. We've kind of moved to this model. So there's some core things that I need to do on a weekly basis. And then after that, I'm going to, and typically speaking, and we try to teach this to leaders, is what are the WIGs that I have, the wildly important goals? What are my big rocks, right? And there's a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. I don't know if you guys have read that or not. It's a great book. It's kind of how we run the metrics of our company, okay?
Right.
Or of our go-to-market organization. There's a concept in there, and we teach this in this leader training that we do, that what are the 2 or 3 big rocks? You can't have 10 big rocks. If you do 10 big rocks, you're never going to be able to be successful. It's just too many things. So pick 2 to 3. So I have 2 to 3 on a yearly basis that I do, right? I've got 2 really big ones this year, and I have a chief of staff, I have an EA, and we're very focused, keeping me on the ball. And I'm sure, as an individual, I can veer off track, but I hold these people accountable to hold me accountable to really, driving these big rocks to success.
Mm-hmm.
Because big rocks at my level are going to have a direct impact on our market capitalization, right?
Yeah.
Right? So I've got to be hyper-focused on those things. And I think it's very easy to get spread out way too much. And the more you get spread out, the less effective you're going to be. And it doesn't necessarily mean that my big rocks are the same as my leaders' big rocks. They're going to be working towards mine, but they may be driving, someone's big rock might be, this was Jeremy Duggan. His big rock always was to have the best pipeline generation team on the face of the earth, right? And that never changed. It never changed, right? You read about it in John McMahon's book, right? And so, that's the way that I run my business. But then there's also the personal side of things as well, right? Because the more responsibility you have, the more people that are going to want your time. And so time becomes a very precious commodity, and you have to be kind of ruthless with your time, specifically the higher up you go. And then I would say that from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint. I think the thing that's often overlooked is that people younger in their career, they don't know the sacrifices that you need to make personally to be able to do some of these jobs, right? And, my wife and I have a great operating rhythm. We've talked about these things. I travel 40 some odd weeks a year. But, I'm home every weekend at my daughter's volleyball tournaments. I haven't picked up a golf club since 2009, and I used to love golfing. But once I have 3 kids, once my second daughter was born, I stopped golfing. I can't go, spend 2 weeks on the road, come home on a weekend, and then So not everybody wants to do that. So we all have to make selfish decisions in our lives. But I think that as people start to plan their careers, it's good to seek advice and to seek information about what kind of demands are put on you both personally and professionally, because you have to marry both of those things, and it's really not always easy, right?
Yeah, I could only imagine. So in a large organization, there's going to be lots of fires to put out as well, right?
Yeah.
How do you prioritize what fires that you get involved with, and which ones are escalated to you and which ones are dealt by your lower team? Is there a rule that you set? Is there a structure you set around this?
I don't know that there's a rule,
Right.
but I think one of my strengths is delegating.
Right.
And, one of the most important things that you can do in any leadership role is having the right bums in the right seats, right? It's so critical to have the right people in the right jobs. If you have that, when I promote people or put people into jobs, I trust them. I trust them because I'm making that conscious decision that I know who this individual is, or we as a group know who an individual is, and we want to have that person in the chair. We have to give them the ability to do their job. And I can't firefight. I'm not saying I don't, but I try to tackle the big things versus the noise, right? And I don't have a textbook answer for that, but you have to be able to do that. Otherwise, the larger you get as an organization, that could be a full-time job. 100 hours a week just dealing with problems, right? And it's just you can't let yourself slip into that, But I delegate and trust until I'm given a reason not to, which is pretty rare.
Obviously, we're starting to talk about huge amounts of pressures put on a CRO, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that personally? Do you have coping mechanisms to deal with pressure? Has it just been you've dealt with it for however long you've been in the job that you've done, and you've just learned to deal with these pressures and part segment those pressures, because it's a lot of pressure, right? It's not just from you, it's from the board, it's from the public, it's from everybody.
Yeah, there's pressure, but there's more just anxiety.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the pressure you feel more at the end of a quarter, and really as you go to a consumption model, it's not as relevant as it used to be, because you're not actually closing that much at the end of a quarter. So I'd say it's just a healthy anxiety. And I'd like to think that I'm a pretty cool under pressure kind of guy. And I think the reason being is I was fortunate as my career went. I didn't get promoted too early, or I didn't chase necessarily for the last 20 years or 15 to 20 years. I wasn't chasing a title. And what I was more focused on was being at a great company where I was going to learn, I was going to earn, and I could get better, and I could learn from the leaders that I was reporting to so that I could develop my career. And so I was fortunate to have spent enough time in each chair that I thought I'd started mastering that role. I did the MongoDB North America sales role for 6 years, right? So when you spend 6 years in a chair and you're fairly successful, I'm in a position where I don't need to panic. Like, I've kind of seen the movies before. They might come in a little bit differently with a different language from a different, area. But really at the end of the day, I think experience gives you a little bit of wisdom, and it gives you the ability to not have to panic at the little things, right? And especially, you don't want to be the person panicking in front of your team. Like, someone has to be there to hold things together when things go wrong, which they inevitably do. But I think if you take a logical, unemotional approach, I think I've screamed once since being at this company.
Wow.
Once.
Wow.
Ever. And I get paid to be the voice of reason. So,
yeah,
that's the way I look at it. I've always looked at it that way as well, honestly. Even when I was a regional director, like a first-line sales leader, when you get put into those roles, I get paid to be the voice of reason,
Well, what are some of your biggest learnings? And you've obviously been 6 months in this role, as an official CRO at MongoDB. But what were some of the blind spots that you didn't realize coming into this role and that you've learned now being in the role? Or was there any?
I mean, I was running most of the world before the official title kind of
Right.
kicked in, right? But what I didn't have was board experience. What I didn't have was like a weekly e-staff experience. And so I don't know if I was surprised at it. I just hadn't really given it a ton of thought, right? But the stakes just get higher, right? And when you're going to board meetings, these are people that are entrusted by the public to hold the company accountable, right? And hopefully our executives have put the right people in the right jobs. And sitting in those board meetings, it's an eye-opening experience, right? I mean, it's a cool thing, right? And then also e-staff, like being involved in decisions that are not just go-to-market decisions, right? Like they're just at a higher company level, and really like a level I had never really thought about before.
What is e-staff, sorry?
E-staff would be like C-level.
Right, okay.
C-level, right?
Okay.
So, the people that basically go to the board meetings on behalf of the company,
Gotcha.
right? Chief marketing officer, chief revenue officer, president, chief legal, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Chief financial officer. So that's e-staff. And I mean, now you're not just talking about numbers and driving a number, right? Or driving a go-to-market strategy. You're talking about driving a company strategy. And so it's just a different level of experience, right? And I mean, I've really, really enjoyed it. I think it's a cool thing,
Looking back on your career, were you chasing CRO? Did you always have your eye on that as a C? Or when did, the aspirations become a CRO, come in for you?
Yeah. I would say there's two sections of my career. The early section, right, where I was chasing the title. I went from being an RD, a first-line leader, and I became VP of Worldwide Sales of a $30 million company, right? And it was basically a second-line leader role. And for sure, at that point in my career, this is maybe like 20 years ago, I was chasing that title, but I didn't really give it a lot of thought, right? And if you're a first-line leader and someone's giving you a CRO role, it's not going to be the best CRO role in the business, right? Like, I mean, first-line leaders aren't getting those roles, as you guys well know, right? And I do think that people often do that in this business to their disadvantage, because what often happens is once you've been in one of those roles, and if it's not a great company, because you're not going to get a great opportunity because you don't have the experience to get a good opportunity unless you get really lucky, which rarely happens, then you go from one company to the next company to the next company, and you see it on people's LinkedIn profiles where they're like 1.5 years, 2 years, 2.5 years, but they never really stay anywhere very long. Or they stay in a job for a really long time, but the company's flat, it's not growing, they're not really exciting because you're not worthy of those better opportunity jobs because you've been focusing on the wrong things, right? I mean, someone once said to me, don't confuse title with opportunity. Right? It really resonated with me. And that changed my whole perspective because I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, you're focused more on the title than you are in developing yourself and really creating a career path for yourself so that you can keep developing at the different stages, the further up you go. And if you can develop yourself and be successful in those increasingly senior roles, by the time you get to the CRO role, you're ready for it, right? Like time in the chair is such an important, successful time in the chair is a very important determination as to where you're going to get to and what kind of CRO role you're going to get, right? And so what I was focused on really until I got to Mongo and even at Mongo was going to a great company where you're going to get development, where you're going to learn, where you're going to have career opportunities, and you're going to make money. Like if you're focused on those things and you're willing to bet on yourself, don't worry about the title. Go do the best that you can do climb up the ranks and great things are going to happen. Like bet on yourself. And so I was very fortunate, right? I ran North America here for 6 years. If my ego had gotten in the way because I just was so focused on being a CRO, I could have left a long time ago. But I would have left a company, and I like to think about it in this way. I'm very lucky at Mongo. I caught a wave. I caught a wave at AppDynamics. I caught a wave at Splunk, but I caught a tsunami at MongoDB. And, when you get on a wave like that, what I didn't confuse was title with opportunity. I'm like, a wave like this comes along once in a lifetime. Like you don't jump off the wave, you ride that wave through, right? And so that's kind of the way that I think about it. And riding the wave was more important than what title's on my business card, right? Now, some people are really focused on it and that's what they want to do. I mean, go for it.
Yeah.
But that's not my philosophy, and I've had a pretty good ride.
Yeah. If you were to structure a textbook route from entering into software sales to get to a CRO, thinking about times and the different seats that you've got to sit in, what would you say that would look like? So, for example, so at the bottom, let's enter into as an SDR.
SDR, yeah.
Let's enter in there and then let's talk about 2 years in an SDR seat to get into.
I think SDR, you want to be there 2 years for sure.
Yeah.
And stop complaining about it because you're going to have to cold call for the rest of your career, right? Whether you're recruiting or whatever, you're going to cold call, right?
You need to learn how to hunt. You need to hunt.
I would say at least 2 to 3 years in each role.
Right.
So, we have SDRs, we have inside sales, we have sort of entry level field reps, we have field reps, we have major account reps. You don't necessarily have to be in every one of those roles, right? But understanding your craft really well gives you the ability when you move up to the next position, right, to be able to do that position even better. Mm-hmm. And then if you get into a leadership role, teach it. And so, I just, the best advice I can give people is just, it's a marathon. Your career's a marathon. Like it's not a sprint, right?
Yeah.
Like just slow down and move faster.
Yeah.
And to me, like focus on the company and the opportunity versus what the title is that you have, right? It's funny, recently I've had people where I live at home in Toronto, not even people that I know well, whose kids are now coming through university and they're like, hey, can you go and talk to my son or my daughter? And I've tried to help some of these guys out. And, they don't always take the advice because they're so focused on the title at that stage in their career. And, there's one person who was at this tiny little software company and worked his way from BDR to inside sales to outside sales. 3 years at they make software for SMB restaurants, like small to medium restaurants, right? So they're going to sell to like individual restaurants. And I said, look, you should go for a role in inside sales at Mongo. I think I really liked the person. I thought they had potential. They interviewed for the job, and they said, wow, it's a little too junior. Have them come in as an SDR. They do it for a year. If things go well, you get promoted to inside sales. You do that for a couple of years. And so the person didn't take my advice because we had said, look, you're not ready to be an inside sales rep because where you are, you've had no development. You're kind of starting from scratch. Come to the major leagues and be an SDR. And within 5 years, you could be making more money than you ever thought possible.
Yeah.
Versus you spend the next 5 years at this company and, you're just playing for the title, but you're not playing, you're playing in, I don't know what it is for soccer, like, championship level or Division 3 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's when it's whole, don't confuse title with opportunity, don't confuse one company with another, right? Like you want to go play in the big leagues.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you think it's the ego that gets in the way there?
Yeah, this was an ego thing for sure.
Right.
He said, well, I'm an outside salesperson right now. I'm like, you are, but nobody really cares. Like nobody of consequence really cares. If you were to go to Mongo or any of the cohort companies that we play with, they're going to hire you in a BDR role now because you don't have. If you had done a BDR role at those companies, you'd be off to the races. But you kind of just made a mistake in your initial career, right?
Yeah. We talk about it, and we've recently done a Sales SOS episode, which is, it's important to stay and be with a company for a good periods of time, right? Yeah. But at the same time, the difference in companies, right? And the different sales motions in organizations and being able to diversify yourself there. So I think we speak about, 2 to 3 years in any particular role. But at the same time, as an IC, would you give advice to going experience different types of technology, different types of sales motions before you even start to step up as that first line leader? Because then you've got the experience in what you sell and how you sell. So you can have more choices when it comes to opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the, we were talking earlier about companies like Snowflake and Databricks, those are big platform decisions. That's not the way we sell, right? I mean, we're open source, we build from the ground up. And other companies are product-led sales. I mean, there's no bad choice, meaning space. There are maybe not bad companies, but there are maybe companies that aren't amazing for you to go build a career at. I mean, the one that I'm talking about, I'm referring to, it was a small local Canadian company that was, 200 employees. They've been 200 employees for 4 years. They're not growing. They created this software, but like the people that are there they're not building the company. It's not growing and they're not developing their people. So, that's not a great choice. Like to me, go to a reputable company. The space can be different, right? Whether you're an APM or, database or, a platform decision, any of those are good choices as long as you're going to a company that's going to give you the ability to learn and develop your career, right? And obviously earn. You want to earn money. If you're in sales, that's the name of the game as well, right?
It's interesting that having spoken to many CROs in this podcast, one of the common themes that we've seen is that the vast majority, if not every single one of them, at some stage in their career, they've gone back at least one level.
Yeah.
In some cases,
in some cases too.
Yeah.
Why do you think that's one of the common threads?
Why? Well, it's funny because for the first 6 years that I was at Mongo, we have all these people that are at the company, the stock price is going up, the numbers are going up. These people had never been through any financial crisis or anything before, right? So I think the longer that you're in the market dynamics are going to change. And it's not always a rosy picture, right? Y2K, financial crisis of 2007, and there hadn't really been a crisis until recently, 2 years ago, for 10, 11 years. So a lot of the people that were working for our company never experienced that before. In times of crisis or in times of change, you might have to do that. I've done that a couple times. I was a SVP of worldwide sales at a tiny company, and I went to be Canada country manager. I was an RD at PTC. My next job was as a rep that I went into a company where I was going to get promoted with a good year so that I can go help to build an organization. I think that you see that sometimes because of those dynamics, right? Not everything grows all the time. And then as a result of that, things might change and maybe the opportunities aren't there. Maybe you're early in your career and you can't afford to be out of work. And so you've got, you don't have a choice, right? For me, I've always been willing to bet on myself. And I think the people who are willing to bet on themselves are typically the people that are going to succeed no matter what, right? And so I think sometimes people don't have the confidence to do that. But taking a step back to take 2 or 3 steps forward, I think can be a really smart thing.
Yeah. And there's also, a lot of them are also seeking development. So they're actually following the right leaders or attaching themselves, I think more importantly,
for sure,
to the right champions. And we talk a lot about career champions. And actually you can be in an organization where you're much further up, but you look up and you see the chain above you and it's completely fractured or there's potential turmoil. And it's impossible for you to navigate that. So going to an organization and attaching yourself to the champions, how important are career champions to be able to help pull you up, in your opinion?
I would say it's not just champions and career champions. I do think that's important. But what I also think is of paramount importance is developing relationships. And, I look at the people that we've had in our leadership ranks who've been at the company, we were talking about it, earlier today, how long the tenure has been of people, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, right? And you develop these relationships, and they're not just relationships that you're going to have today. They're going to be relationships that you have for the rest of your life. So I agree with you. You for sure want to have internal champions that are going to help to promote you, right? And hopefully move your career ahead. But those relationships that you have, like I still have relationships from my earliest days at PTC, and then at BMC, which is almost 20 years ago now, right? Those relationships in your career, like what those do is, I've never, since I worked at PTC, I've never been seeking a job, ever. It's always been by word of mouth, by relationships. I haven't had to put a resume together in 20 some odd years, right? I mean, LinkedIn's helped with that as well. But my point is, the relationships that you have are not just for today, especially if you're early in your career. The more relationships you can develop, the better off you're going to be.
So, Paul, you've obviously had an extensive journey. How have you evolved as a leader over time?
I think one of the things that's probably meant the most to me and as being the most impactful, right, is earlier in my career, starting at PTC, I mean, it was just full on all the time, gun to your head, hit the quarterly number, quite barbaric. But for me, in a good way back in the day, because I was a young up and comer and I was just a sponge and I wanted to learn. And then I think as my journey, I won't even say my leadership, my journey evolved, leadership was a very operational thing, right? Which clearly, I mean, it's the most important thing. You got to hit a number, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we do. But COVID changed some things for us at Mongo. And so like every company, we went into it eyes wide open with fear and trepidation that no one had ever been through anything like this before. And we came out of it, actually, I would say, a more understanding and less ruthless leadership team for the better. And what we ended up doing, we ran an exercise, which was amazing, where we developed a session for our leaders. And I had to do it myself before my leaders did it. And I came up with what my values were and what my purpose was. And I remember the first time I presented that was to a North America audience of there was about 90 people in the meeting. I remember vividly, we're in Chicago, and I got up and I talked about my values and what I stood for. And I think I'd done that in conversation with people before, right? Kind of just ad hoc. But I actually put pen to paper and presented it with really heartfelt purpose. And what it did was it just exposed vulnerabilities that I have. And I was incredibly nervous doing it because I'd never done anything like that before. And it went over really well. And, Cedric, who's my boss, is the president of Mongo. We started it with him at one of his offsites. And then we did that throughout our leadership chain in the organization. And it just really, when you talk about why people have stayed so long at Mongo, I guarantee you that was a big factor. Right. It's like leading with empathy, leading with vulnerability, leading with purpose, right? And really focusing on relationships. And it's so important, right? Because at the end of the day, as a CRO, you're in the people business. You're only as good as the people that you have. right? It doesn't matter how smart you are, how good of a salesperson you are. You're as good as the people that are in the chairs, and you want to keep those people, especially the more that you invest and you develop those people. And I just think that leadership in the last 10 to 15 years has matured in ways that is only good for our business.
So this is the point where we reflect on what's been an amazing session today. I just want to start off by saying a massive thank you to you, Paul, for coming in and sharing your wisdom. But I suppose some of the real key takeaways here is really kind of the way that we've been able to really distill how does the role, how as you're progressing, what is the lens? What are the things that really, really matter? And what are the blind spots? And, someone that's thinking about this, while you should be intentional with the way you want to take your career, a lot of the time it's about really slowing down in order to find your path. Because a lot of the time you're so keen to get on a path that you don't really even understand the path that you actually want, not the best path for you.
Yeah, you're just charging ahead blindly.
You're charging ahead blindly. And I think that unless you've actually gone and sat in and incubated yourself, failed and learned and developed and given yourself the opportunity to create mastery so that you can then pass that on to others. Yes, there's always going to be things that you don't know. But if you chase that, it's probably going to limit your ceiling. And I think that's what we're talking about today. So again, a massive thank you. It's been a fantastic session. Great to have you in London.
Yeah.
And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I love what you guys do. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I think just to add to that, I think, it's really easy to be thinking too much about the future rather than the present and being, exceptional at the job and the mastery of the job that you're doing now, because you're too busy thinking about the next step, which isn't actually giving you the right space and headspace to actually think about the job that you're doing.
I think if you work for a great company that has great leaders, that have a history and a philosophy of developing people from within and promoting from within, just go and crush the job that you're doing and good things are going to happen, and bet on yourself, right? And I think typically when people do that, they're successful.
That's the statement. But again, thank you so much for joining us, Paul. So to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe to our various channels on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. All the links will be in the description below, and we look forward to welcoming you back for another session very soon. Take care and good night. To all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you've heard, please do subscribe to our various channels on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. All the links will be in the description below, and we look forward to welcoming you back for another session very soon. Thank you.